Hello, everyone. You're welcome to the Energy Africa Café podcast conversational series dedicated to African professionals in leadership positions within the renewable energy sectors, climate and sustainability sectors as well. We will delve into the experiences, challenges, providing a platform for shared wisdom and fostering a community of empowerment. My name is Tosin George, and I'm your host for today. And we are kicking off this episode with an incredible guest who embodies vision, leadership, and impact in the world of climate finance and sustainable infrastructure. We have the pleasure today of meeting Barka Sajou. He is the co-founder and investment committee member at Angeles Sostenibles. So thank you so much for joining us today, Barka.
Thank you so much for having me on the Energy Africa Café podcast, Tosin. It's a pleasure to join you.
You're welcome. So just a bit of a bio and background on Barka. Barka is the visionary leader in sustainable infrastructure and climate finance with over 15 years of experience transforming energy access across emerging markets. His career embodies intersection of technical expertise, innovative financing, and social impacts in renewable energy development. And as the former executive director of capital projects and infrastructure at Nigeria's Rural Education Agency, Barka has led transformative initiatives that have brought power to 2 million households and businesses across sub-Saharan Africa. He strategically mobilized $750 million in World Bank financing and architected an ESG compliant business model that raised $850 million in blended capital for climate mitigation and adaptation projects. Currently serving as a co-founder and investment committee member at Angeles Sostenibles, Barka leads investment project management for a $20 million gender-based smallholder economic liberation fund while advising sustainable development initiatives and impact funds globally. As a Shell undergraduate National Merit Scholar with degrees from the universities of Maiduguri, Greenwich, and Zaragoza, is currently pursuing a global executive MBA program, and his journey from a data analyst to a leading voice in climate finance really serves as an inspiration for professionals seeking to make a meaningful impact in the sustainable development space. This is brilliant. This is an impressive profile and such an incredible journey. And something I think that strikes me is that you started as a data analyst and, to all the impact that you're making in this space. Well, really looking forward to this. So thank you so much again for being here.
Thank you.
So just before we jump into the podcast proper, do you mind just sharing a bit about your current role as the co-founder and investment committee member? What does that mean, Angeles Sostenibles?
Yes, thank you very much, Tosin, for that background. When you read my profile, I was wondering if it was me. I couldn't have read it better. I'm very humbled. So in the last 10 to 15 years, I have worked across the intersection between technical projects, whether it's on-grid or off-grid, providing power to a market or to households. Right now, focused on mobilizing capital for projects because I think that's like the biggest challenge in Africa. So to answer your question directly, what does my role entail? Essentially, this is a bespoke advisory, but it is blended with the ability to do venture support. So it's like a venture studio. We work with small companies that are involved in providing energy access and helping them to try to put together their funding requirements and helping them to also access capital. I also support a fund, a venture capital fund that is involved in sustainable investment, not just in energy. The fund is called Loyal Venture Capital out of Canada. I think what I'm currently doing at Angeles Sostenibles is running a platform that gives me the flexibility to continue to support climate innovations and finance.
That's amazing. And we do need support because there's a lot of, as the funding, there's a lot of innovation out of Africa as it touches climate and sustainability. That's a great position to be feeling at the moment. So just looking at your career journey, you mentioned that, you said that a data analyst.
Yes.
Almost not linked. Not that there is no link, but
yes.
What we hear that people started off, maybe as something quite different, not from data analyst right into climate finance. I've just read off your profile. You talked about your experience spanning technical engineering, leadership, obviously finance. What were the choices? What were some of the professional choices that drove you to transition from deploying renewable energy projects to spearheading climate financing, right? It's a huge market and an emerging space to be right now. So what moved you there?
Right. So you know, there's this famous saying, I think it's by Steve Jobs, that you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only do so looking backwards. I mean, when I look back, I think all the dots aligned for me. I'm very fortunate and I'm lucky, and everything is interconnected. You know, the whole experience has been integrated. Starting out as an energy data analyst, it was pretty much just analyzing large set of data in the oil and gas sector, you know, for the consumption of my superiors and to aid their decision making. And so I did that for a couple of years, working with the National Oil Company, the NNPC, and went back to school to, you know, further my education on electrical power systems. So at the time, Nigeria was already liberalizing the market, you know, and there was this privatization drive ongoing and everything.
Yeah.
So just honing my skill, you know, understanding the dynamics of the power system was very helpful. And then when I got back, I had the opportunity to work with a facility called the Nigerian Infrastructure Advisory Facility. That was a UK government-sponsored program through the FCDO. Then I think it was called the DFID. And
Yeah.
essentially, it was to provide reforms, support in terms of reforms. So government was undergoing reforms in the electricity sector. And so there I saw the missing link between infrastructure delivery and the amount of capital, the share capital that was required to actually make these investments that were needed to utilize these reforms. So for me, from day one, it's always been about scale in terms of impact, you know, about prioritizing the results, about looking at how you could utilize innovation and also trying to develop business models. And this is what that facility actually represented. So I was lucky from the get-go to be in such an environment where I could do work that would immediately result into changes in terms of reforms. So we did quite a lot of work there. But I think very quickly in 2016, I think the phase of the project was ending as a result of some of the work that I had done there. At this short-term role with the World Bank, where we were looking to now launch something called the green bonds. So essentially, it's just raising debt capital from the market. I don't want to bore you with too much technical details. I'm mindful of the audience as well. I want this to be relevant. So we went to raise money from the capital market to do green projects. And I was responsible for pretty much developing this project. They included mini grids in some villages, you know, and it was government that was borrowing this market from the stock exchange market, right? And, you know, because that had not been done before, a lot of people were a bit unsure, and we weren't really particularly sure of how to go about it. But the good news is, it was oversubscribed. We got the capital we needed, and the green bonds actually helped to build projects that you may be aware of, like some of the university projects. There were some university solar projects, the first 7 university projects in Nigeria, you know, that we built solar powered projects. And so I think that was the turning point. So I'll just answer and close this segment of your question by saying the reason for this intersection between, you know, infrastructure and capital is just too enormous. And that was what really helped me to focus on my career, moving on to finance.
Thank you for that, Barka. Thank you so much. And, you know, speaking on capital and financing, right? And that's such a big topic, you know, when it comes to renewable energy, particularly in Africa and especially Nigeria. Do you see any intersection between technical knowledge and financing? And how crucial is it? Because it's just not enough to finance. The technical knowledge is also there. So how do you think this intersection plays a role in Africa's energy future?
I think it's apparent as well. And the reason for this intersection being very critical is because we already have abundant renewable resources and I'd say some talent as well. But without innovative financing structures, you know, this potential will remain untapped. And I witnessed this with the REA, and that's the Rural Electrification Agency, where as you read, I was an executive there. You know, when you combine deep technical understanding with creative financing solution, only then can you scale up solutions. We achieved the 2 million target that was set for us because we were able to design programs that had innovative capital. There was the Nigerian education project and the $550 million project that provided grants and result-based financing for different sorts of projects. And so for me, that's the power of bridging the gap between financing and technical expertise. There's still a lot of work to do in terms of capacity building. If you look at the environment of our developers, so people who actually develop these projects, many of them initially entered the market because of lack of employment, and so they were learning on the job. A lot of people didn't really know what it took. But Nigeria, I think in the last decade, yes, there were a lot of pilot projects and all of that. But if you have 60, 70 million people without energy access, then you need to scale. And for you to scale, you need to address financing. But if you have too much financing and you don't have the capability from the technical standpoint to deploy, then that's also going to pose another type of challenge.
Very insightful. And just to speak on your experience at Rural Education Agency, right? We've talked about, you supporting and mobilizing $750 million through the World Bank and the refinancing programs and all of the capital solutions associated with that.
Yes.
Right. But in spite of all this funding and technical knowledge you've spoken of, what do you think are some of the challenges behind funding sustainable energy projects, particularly in emerging markets like Sub-Saharan Africa?
Right. So just before I answer that question, on the $750 million, I played a pivotal role. I can't take credit for mobilizing the whole of $750 million. And I like to clarify these things because sometimes people, are like, oh, come give us 300 million. If you can mobilize 750, it doesn't work like that. It's a whole lot of stakeholder engagement with DFIs, that's development finance institutions. And I think what we are most proud of the team is it was on the basis of the success of the first project, which was the Nigerian education project, that we were able to tell success stories to attract the $750 million. Now, having said that, your questions around the concerns, the challenges when it comes to funding in Africa, and I'll speak broadly. I think the first thing from my perspective is the idea of developing bankable projects. And a lot of times people say this and don't really understand what it means. I'll break it down. Essentially, when you go to financiers, a bank, they want to see through the project business model. How do I give you money? How do you make money? And how do you return the money back to me? So this is one of the challenges we're having, especially within emerging environments in Africa. A second thing, and in no particular order, a second thing I would say is the mismatch between investors' expectations and the project realities on ground. Projects in Africa take a long time to develop, and it's because of the environments, right? It's a number of issues. So sometimes you have funders who expect very aggressive returns, but do not understand the peculiarities in our environment. And so that mismatch would delay funding. A third thing, which I think is a bit linked, is the perception of risk, and, there's currency risk. You're doing your project, you're selling power in a village in Ile-Ife, you're collecting Naira, but you got funding in dollars, So this potentially could pose some challenges. But on the flip side, there have been some creativity in the space. And I mean, I can speak to that in detail, but there's a lot happening. AFDB, for example, just launched a guarantee product that provides some sort of capital in terms of local currency to be able to mitigate this currency debt. And so there's recent completion of the Mission 300 gathering of heads of states in Tanzania. That was very instructive because a lot of financial commitments that are tailored to address the financing problems in the African energy space where we're committed to.
Mm-hmm. So my next question was really going to be around innovative financing mechanisms. I know that you've mentioned already, but is this a long-term solution? What innovative financing mechanisms do we have? Are they actually effective in attracting more private sector participation?
That's an interesting question you've asked, because when we talk about sustainability, people think it's about technology alone. Even the financing has to be sustainable. And so the idea of long-term just helps me in reflecting about sustainability. And so for me, some of the instruments we're like developing some of the solutions, they do not necessarily reflect longevity, but there are new products and there are new thinking that will actually help with that. So there's something called blended finance, and I like blended finance because for me, it's an idea of bringing different types of capital, as opposed to just one type of capital, maybe foreign investment in dollars. You're mixing the funding that you're offering with project development funding, maybe grants. You're mixing it with some government support in terms of laws, in terms of permits, making things easy. You're mixing the financing with something maybe like first loss capital from your development finance institutions. And a cocktail of all this financing is what is going to actually be the pathway to progress. Because we've seen it before, launching something at a commercial rate, maybe from commercial banks, nobody goes to collect money because they're like, okay, how about the development cost? You try launching something that's purely grant-based, people are wondering, what about, the sustainability? So I think for me, the answer in terms of innovative finance, or one of the many answers, could be actually blended finance. Another thing that we may need to look at is also creating the marketplace where, people don't have to go and search for solutions. So this marketplace is places where financing products are available in terms of programs. So like what we are doing, what's being done in the area, you have the Distributed Access Renewable Energy Scale-Up Program, the 750 million program. When things are done in a programmatic fashion, it reduces the time developers and project proponents go to source for capital. So they know that there's a one-stop shop. They know the intention of the program. They just need to pre-qualify and plug in and then get access to funding directly. They don't have to always talk to funders. That in itself actually increases the cost of capital, and it takes time for them to also access capital. So for me, I think these two things, you can have variance and all of that, but these two approaches pretty much would be able to address some of these challenges.
That's quite clear to me. And I like the idea of, approaching this from a system point of view. So there's already a system. Plug into the system, you get the outcome, and then you move on with your project. Now, I'm thinking about other stakeholders in the African renewable energy ecosystem. So like entrepreneurs, policymakers, investors as well. And do you think there's certain overlooked opportunities in the climate finance space? Because everyone it seems to be like going on and on over climate finance, but you might just be focusing on the most popular things. So are there certain opportunities that you think are overlooked and that entrepreneurs, policymakers, and the like should be on the lookout for?
I like this question because it kind of expands the horizon. And there's a lot that is happening in East Africa. Since we are talking about like the whole Africa environment, climate and investment environment, there's a lot happening there that other people can learn from, including Nigeria. And I think in terms of overlooked opportunities, some things that come to mind would be local financing by the local capital market. It would interest you to note that a lot of capital is stuck in the local institutional investors, and maybe they are scared, maybe they are not so knowledgeable. That's one area that is overlooked, as opposed to going on funding rounds abroad and everything. Attracting more local capital would help. I think Kenya is doing some work in that regard, and I think an institution called FSD is helping them with that. Nigeria is also looking at that aspect. The Nigerian Stock Exchange is probably $50 billion or what's in size, and there's a whole lot of money that you can attract for infrastructure there. Second thing I have seen that I think is worth looking at is when you look at the value chain on energy system, sometimes value is not in the traditional models. You can look at complementers. So productive use of energy is something that is also important. What I mean here is you have to incentivize people to subscribe to the access of energy that addresses their productivity. If people are farming, then you should be providing electricity for agricultural processes, so that they can make money to be able to pay for the energy. So we did some pilots in this regard while we had RE for electric mobility with 2 to 3 wheelers, and then some pilot as well for agricultural processing, and it was largely successful. I think this should be scaled and replicated. And finally, I think we need to look at how we can tap from the global climate funds. And so to do this, you also have to look inwards in terms of your sustainability practices. So ESG, for example, environmental, social, and governance consideration in terms of project deployment will not be negotiable. It's something that must be at the center of our investment decisions, at the center of our project delivery, so that at least we align with the global best practice and also attract capital that is available out there.
Mm-hmm. I like the idea of also looking inward, so local solutions for funding, not to early professionals, right? People in career and looking at transitioning to climate finance. For someone who is thinking of, oh, I like what Barka's doing, I really consider transitioning. What are some of the things, skills they require, experiences? I'm not big on certifications, but would they require certifications as well? What are some of the things you think they should prioritize if they're transitioning into climate finance?
I think some of the technical things and the financing things we already spoke of create like that segue to this conversation around advising mid-career professionals. If you want to transition, I think there's always a starting point, given that the climate environment is multidisciplinary. Whether you're an accountant or an engineer, there's a role for you, right? So my first advice would be, first of all, have a technical grasp of the environment, basic understanding of what actually climate is about, and it affects all of us. It's all around us, heat waves, changing rain patterns, disruptions in supply chains, and, as a result of adverse climate effects. So just getting an understanding of our environment, is the beginning. I think very quickly, and I'm just leaning on my own story and my own experience, is, just also picking up skills in basic financial literacy, because at the end of the day, as soon as you realize the problem and you kind of get a sense of what the technical solution is, the next thing is about money. And in practical terms, how do you learn some of these skills? The internet, the way we learn has changed. Like, there are a lot of free courses online. I see a lot of content, and I'm constantly learning myself. Like, I have 2 degrees already and I'm doing a third one. I'm doing an MBA because I want to constantly learn. So if that hunger is there, and you're trying to learn in a systematic way, then very quickly you would be able to bring value in a space like climate that is extremely multidisciplinary.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words. Because as young professionals, particularly for Africans, we're encouraging more investments and more action in this space, right? So it's important that young people can find a way around. And so I think it's so important to lay that foundation so that you have more people, more actors in this space. If you had the chance to switch jobs with someone else in the energy industry for a day, what would it be, and what aspect of their role would you be most excited to try?
Wow. Maybe not energy sector. Like, I don't want to limit it because I do many things. Maybe not the most liked person at the moment, Elon Musk. And I say this because from the positives, at least, the ability to disrupt processes and innovate, that disruption mindset is what has helped us in the world to leapfrog. I would use the example of mobility. He had to create the entire ecosystem for charging for Tesla to work. And today, the Chinese are taking the leadership as well. Everybody around the world has started to embrace electric vehicle and electric mobility. When it started out, the whole charging infrastructure, the whole infrastructure in terms of production of those kind of cars and, battery systems and storage didn't exist in large scale, at least.
Yeah. I love that.
And maybe just some final thoughts, because I like to always share things with young professionals, especially. I think what I would say is success, doesn't come from approaching each opportunity with, a closed mindset. You've got to do it with an integrated mindset. You're learning how to do something here, you're learning something to do there. You have to bring them together with a big picture view, and don't be scared to fail. Just fail and try again.
Thank you so much, Barka, for coming to our podcast. This has been a wonderful one. And I know that those listening have learned so much. If you've not learned anything, I think they've learned one thing about climate finance. And it's been such a pleasure to get to know you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And to our audience, thank you so much for listening in. Please don't forget to like, to share, and comment on this podcast if you enjoyed it, as I did. Follow us on our LinkedIn page at the Energy Africa. Thank you once again. Do have a lovely day ahead. Bye-bye.